Hey Potomac, third grade, Miss Manno back again to do another read aloud for you. Before we begin, we've got to get to our joke of the day. Why do hamsters stay in shape? Because they are really good runners. Haha. We are going to pick up again with Runaway Ralph. And we have been given special permission to do this by the publisher Scholastic. When Miss Catlet left off, Chum, this mystery animal, has returned to camp in a cage and is seated right next to Ralph. So let's read to find out what this mystery animal is. Ralph sat on his wheel to get a better look at the new occupant of the nature corner, a cranky-looking animal with tan and white fur. An occupant is someone who takes up that space or who lives there, so you are an occupant of your house. Ralph, who had never seen such an animal, watched silently while the creature, whatever it was, shoved and pushed and stomped at the cedar shavings in his cage. He seemed to have difficulty arranging them to his satisfaction. Next, he went through his food dish, picked out a number of small green pellets, and shoved them outside his cage. Here is a picture of, I believe this is Ralph watching. The cedar shavings still did not please him, so he went back to shoving, pushing, and stomping. From time to time, he paused to gnaw or chew noisily at the bars of his cage with his long, curving teeth. Finally, when the bell had rung and the campers had gone off for their noon meal, Ralph, in his eagerness for companionship, could no longer remain silent. "What are you anyway?" he asked. "Some kind of fancy gopher?" The animal spat a green pellet out of his cage before he shot Ralph a withering look of scorn. "Fancy gopher indeed," he sniffed. "Well," Ralph faltered. I didn't know. You can't blame me for asking." "I am a hamster," said the animal. "A golden hamster. I am clean, odorless, and alert." "You don't look gold to me," said Ralph. "You look tan and hairy." At that response, the hamster turned his back on the mouse. Ralph nibbled at a kernel of corn before he made up his mind to try again. "Pretty nice place we have here," he remarked. "Plenty of food and water. Interesting things to watch." The hamster climbed on his exercise wheel and sat swinging to and fro while he stared at Ralph. When Chum remained silent, Ralph continued, "It's safe from the cat, too." Chum appeared never to blink his eyes. "Maybe," he said. Ralph's whiskers trembled. That one word spoken by the hamster hinted at evils unknown to Ralph. Here was an animal who was wise in the ways of the world. "Well, go on," thought Ralph impatiently. "Tell me more." Chum was silent. Finally, Ralph was forced to say, "How come that girl brought you here to Happy Acres?" "It's a long story," said Chum. "I'm not in any hurry," said Ralph. "Go on." Chum spat the hull of a sunflower seed into the bottom of his cage. "I was one of 13 hamsters, 6 girls and 7 boys, born in the back room of a pet store." 13? Ralph was awed or amazed. "That's bigger than my litter." What was it like living in a pet store? "We had a happy, carefree childhood there in the cage in the back room," Chum continued. "There was plenty of food and water and fresh cedar shavings in the bottom of the cage. We slept all day, all 13 of us, in a warm and cozy heap, or a pile. Then, at night, as we grew older, we would play. Oh, the fun that we had those nights in the pet shop." Chum paused, a faraway look in his eyes. "Go on," urged Ralph. "Where was I?" asked Chum. "Oh, yes, the frolics we had at night. And then, Chum's voice shook with emotion. Ralph waited quietly until the hamster was able to continue. "One day, I was sound asleep in the corner of the cage. By then, we had grown a lot, and I was on the bottom of the heap, but I didn't feel squished. I felt safe and cozy there, beneath my brothers and sisters, when suddenly—" Chum stopped, unable to go on. "Don't stop now," pleaded Ralph. "What happened?" "A great human hand, a hand that smelled of dog." Ralph shuddered. "Reached in and picked up several of my brothers and sisters. Let me tell you, that woke us all up in a hurry. We were terrified. We scrambled around trying to hide behind our mother, under the wheel, in some cedar shavings, any place. I was slower than the rest because, you see, I was cramped from being slept on by brothers and sisters, and so the hand, that terrible doggy hand, got me. It didn't matter. That hand got all us youngsters and turned us upside down in the most undignified fashion. And then we were put into 2 cages, boys in one and girls in another." "What for?" asked Ralph. "Don't rush me," said Chum, picking up a sunflower seed in his paws and cracking it with his teeth. When he had eaten the kernels, he continued, "Let me tell you, it was a terrible shock. Shortly after, the doggy hand picked up our cage and loaded it into what was called a station wagon." "I know!" Ralph was eager to show off his knowledge. "I used to see them in the parking lot outside the hotel. They were always full of children and luggage and sometimes a dog or 2. Chum ignored the interruption. "We soon found ours was not the only cage to go into the station wagon. Our sisters were loaded in beside us, along with a box of turtles, a cage of rather downhearted canaries, and 2 large cages, one containing puppies and the other some very silly kittens. Oh, yes, and a cage of white mice." "White mice?" said Ralph scornfully. "Anybody, not just owls, could see white mice in the dark." Then the man with the doggy-smelling hands climbed into the front seat along with his wife, and we were off. "Where to?" asked Ralph. "The county fair," answered Chum, "and it was a terrible trip. Kittens meowed, puppies whimpered, turtles scrabbled around in their box." "What's a county fair?" interrupted Ralph. "A noisy place," said Chum. "It's full of people yelling, children laughing and shrieking, machinery that whirls and spins and plays music, all sorts of animals that neigh and moo and baa. It was hot and dusty, and our cages were set in a booth. By that time, we hamsters were exhausted. It had been light for several hours, and we hadn't had a wink of sleep. "I know what you mean," said Ralph with feeling. "That was only the beginning," continued Chum. "A steady stream of people, mostly children, passed our cages." That means that there were a lot of people going by. There wasn't a break. There were just people, people, people. Big, little, most of them sticky, and all of them noisy. "Look, Mommy! Look, Daddy! Look at the darling little hamsters! I want one! Daddy, buy me a hamster!" All morning long. Parents were better. "Don't be silly. Of course you can't have a hamster. You didn't take care of the last hamster you had. Come along." "We don't have time to look at hamsters." Then a whole busload of children, all of them wearing white t-shirts with letters across the front. "Camp t-shirts?" interrupted Ralph knowledgeably. "From Happy Acres?" Came crowding around the booth. They didn't have any parents with them, so they bought pets. "You?" asked Ralph. "Me," said Chum. "I was bought by that grubby girl with freckles. To make a long story short, the doggy hands stuffed me into a hot little cardboard box with a few so-called air holes poked into it, and I spent the rest of the day being jounced around, peeked at, and fed bits of caramel corn." "Sounds good," said Ralph. "Maybe to a mouse." There was a touch of scorn in Chum's voice. "We rode in a bus to this camp, where a counselor put together a makeshift cage out of a bucket with a piece of screen bent over the top. After a few days, the girl's family arrived. There was quite a fuss when the parents saw that their daughter owned a hamster, but her two little brothers set up such a howl that once more I was stuffed into a box with so-called air holes. And after more bouncing and jostling, I arrived at the family's house, where I was put into this cage where I have lived ever since. Poked at with pencils whenever the children's horrid little friends came over to play. Fed hamster food full of nasty little alfalfa pellets that I keep shoving out of my cage. You'd think they would catch on after a while, but no. They just kept on feeding me food mixed with alfalfa pellets. The worst part of my life is that I never get a full day's sleep. Someone's always moving the cage to dust, rattling something against the bars, running the vacuum cleaner, practicing violin lessons. It is not an easy life, let me tell you. "But how did you get back to camp?" Ralph wanted to know. Last year, when Lana was packing her duffel bag for camp, her mother said that since the people who ran the camp had let her buy me, they could put me up for 2 weeks. She was tired of reminding Lana to feed me and clean my cage and wanted a vacation herself. She said the same thing this year, so here I am at camp for the 3rd time. "Oh well, at least it's a change, and nobody runs a vacuum cleaner or practices the violin near my cage." Ralph was silent. Chum had given him a lot to think about. Like Chum, he sat swinging to and fro on his wheel, swinging and thinking. And as he swung and thought, something caught his eye. It was the striped forepaw of Katso reaching through the hole in the rusty screen door. Ralph watched in frightened fascination. The screen bulged from the pressure of Katso's shoulder as the paw groped and searched. It was reaching through and just trying to grab what it could. The rusted screen stretched, and the evil paw with its claws unsheathed reached farther into the craft shop, so his claws were out. Un means not. We know that from our prefix suffix practice. And sheathed has to do with being covered. So like a knife might be covered. If you unsheath it, now it's the sharp part is out. His sharp claws were out. Where's Sam? Thought Ralph in terror. Why isn't that watchdog watching? The paw withdrew, and Katso's face pressed into the hole. His evil green eyes searched the craft shop. Ralph shrunk into a ball into the farthest corner of his cage until he heard a short bark from Sam and summoned his courage to look around. Katso was gone, but the hole in the rusty screen remained. That is the end of chapter 4. Our activity, our response for this part of the chapter is I want you to just write a short story about a childhood memory, something you remember from when you were younger. Maybe it's something that made you scared, like Chum's story where he was a little bit afraid of what was happening. Maybe it's about you going to a camp for the first time, or anything that you've been through. You could write down how you're feeling right now. Write a story about this experience. This is something that most of us are not used to. We're not used to staying home all day long. So think about it, write about it. If you want to share, feel free to send me your responses. And I look forward to reading to you guys again soon. Bye.